And ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Just before we start,
Now we will get started. I'd like to call the meeting to order and ask if Robin would take roll. It's 5:31 on Arthur's official clock.
Heidi Emberling. Lynn Philpott. Adrian Fine. Co-chair Dan Garber. Annette Glankoff. Jennifer Hedderly. Hamilton Hitchings.
Here.
Our co-chair Arthur Keller. Here. Shawnee Kleinhaus. Lydia Koo. Steve Levy. Don McDougall. Whitney McNair. Julia Moran. Mark Nadeem. Bonnie Packer. Lisa Peshke. I'm sorry, Lisa Peshke Coat. I'm changing it up tonight. Doria Suma. Amy Sung. Jason Titus. Elaine Wang. Ellen Erbrock. Alex Van Riesen. Bob Winslow. 5 absent.
Who is the fifth? I've got Lydia, Steve, Jason, Bob.
Heidi.
We'll note that Stephen Levy is not joining us. Okay. And welcome, Hillary. First, we will have oral communications. We have one speaker. Rita Verhel, you'll have 3 minutes? Yes. 3 minutes. And, thank you.
Don't start my time. Is it working? Okay, great. So I'm Rita Varela. I live over on Channing, and I've been very concerned about the rising home inequity in Palo Alto. Fortunately, I bought my little bungalow in 1983, so I don't have to worry about rents or some of the problems that many of our public safety workers, teachers, and tech workers worry about. Last night, if you were at the city council meeting, there was a very raucous discussion about mostly Palo Alto Forward, I believe, demanding that the city council make available housing to people that on average make $120,000 but cannot afford the average cost of a Palo Alto home, which was given as $2 to $3 million. If you have been looking at house prices over the last several years, $2 to $3 million in Palo Alto will not buy you very much anymore. And what I am seeing is these 3-bedroom, 1-bath, 3-bedroom, 2-bath traditional homes built before 1980 being purchased, torn down, and made into mega mansions, which then sell for anywhere from $5 to $7 million. The question is, how can we make the buying field a little bit more equitable? I would like to plead with your group, as I will plead with other groups, to consider adding all basement square footage into the floor area ratio on all new development. Currently, I believe only the garage counts as in the floor area ratio, and I'm not quite sure why this occurred, but I believe it started in the 1980s when basements were traditionally someplace where you put your heater. If you go over to 736 Garland, my favorite basement, this basement is 3,543 square feet, and on top of that sits a 3,500 square foot house. This was a traditional 3 and 2 in a residential area, which has been pretty much made over, and when this house comes on the market, it will be out of reach for most people living near, working in, or commuting to Palo Alto. Also, this makes housing for lower income workers impossible, and I think it's probably impossible at any rate at this point. That's another thing. So I would really ask that you look into the floor area ratio and remedy the situation by adding all basement space to the floor area ratio. If you know Bob Moss, he has also spoken quite eloquently regarding this floor area ratio inequity, and maybe I can get him to come to one of your meetings. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see no other speaker cards. Sure. Shani, who has to leave now, is going to spend 3 minutes and give us some of her comments on some of the topics.
Okay. Can you hear now? Okay. I gave public comment at City Council last night asking to put a hold on the EIR. I said to them that the EIR as is now is premature for many reasons. One is that I don't know how many of you have had a chance to look at it. I haven't. Another is that a supplemental EIR is already scheduled, which means that if we want to submit comments, we have to do it twice, which puts undue burden on all of us who in the public who wants to comment on the EIR. Another thing is that there's a lot of things moving forward that seems like we are discussing them right now. Why don't we put a hold on that until these things are resolved and then do an EIR on everything at the same time? Right now there's 4 alternatives. They are considering a 5th one. Maybe some of the alternatives that are there now can be dropped, and then we don't have to waste money on continuing analysis of things that really make no sense based on discussion here. So I would like to add that to your discussion and love to know what you decide, but to recommend to the City Council. But if you haven't had a chance to read it, the comments are due on the 6th. It's not a lot of time to read that big document. They make reasonable comments and then get another one of the same kind. So thank you. I have to leave, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Shani. With that, I believe staff has some comments to make.
Thank you, Dan, Arthur, everyone. I just wanted to start this off, and then Elaine and Andrew are going to help with this staff comments this evening. Excuse me. Just kind of picking up where Shani left off, the council had a good conversation last night. It was late, so some of us are a little blurry-eyed today. But they had a conversation about the idea of adding a scenario to the EIR. So it's, as Shani indicated, we have a draft EIR on the street. It's actually been out there since early February. If you haven't taken a look by now, you have a couple more weeks left. Comments are due by June 8th. But the council has already indicated their desire to analyze a scenario in addition to those that are analyzed in the draft EIR. So the discussion last night was about what would that scenario look like. And surprise, surprise, they didn't decide they wanted to analyze one more scenario. They said, we want 2 more scenarios. So we're still figuring out how to respond to the council's direction last night. But I do think it's clear that the council, in the course of their conversation, every conversation, in fact, that they have about these issues, they offer insights that are useful to us in the planning process. And all of you are aware that we're complex thinkers here in Palo Alto. We're trying to do a few things at once. We're trying to make sure that the EIR process is moving and that it's informing what we're doing as a CAC and at the City Council on the planning issues. At the same time, we're trying to take the information and the comments that are gleaned from the environmental review process and feed that back into the planning process. So it's not unusual to have interaction between these two things, but the thought that we're doing it, or the simultaneity of it, makes it challenging. And I do recognize that, and the staff and I are happy to help you with any additional questions that you have about the issue. I think we're going to find it's continues to be important that we think in an integrative fashion, that we take from council discussions what we can, and that we do what the land use subcommittee has really started doing in a fantastic way, which is articulate what options are for the council. So when we bring the CAC's work products to the council, we're clearly outlining some options for them. So just specifically in terms of what we learned last night, we got direction to look at two different scenarios, one on the big side and one on the small side. I think if I were going to interpret, and invite those of you who heard the discussion to offer your thoughts when we get into the land use discussion, but if I were going to interpret what I thought the council's direction was saying to us, it was saying don't be afraid to put out there some options that are really quite different in terms of scale and in terms of the amount of growth and the changes that you would think of in terms of policy. Articulate those options, and ultimately at the end of the day, we'll make a decision based on all of the data we have in front of us and the recommendations of the CAC and the Planning Commission. So one of the options was in response to folks arguing that we should go big on housing, and it suggests that we would accelerate the rate of housing production over the next 15 years. And the other one is more about staying small in terms of growth, or relatively small in terms of growth, but really maxing out the potential of performance measures and kind of sustainability practices to address the impacts of development that happens. And so, those are both kind of themes that we've already been talking about as a group, and I think that we'll continue to talk about in the land use discussions this evening and in the months ahead. So next steps on the EIR schedule, as I mentioned, your comments, if you're submitting written comments, are due on the 8th of June, by the 8th of June, and then the council will be holding a public hearing on the EIR if you want to just provide written comments on June 6th. I expect at that point there'll be a little bit of follow-up discussion on these scenarios that they posited last night. So that's kind of what I wanted to say, and now Elaine is going to offer some thoughts on the schedule, and Andrew's going to do a little preview of where we are with the packet and what we expect from this evening.
Okay, great. Okay, so it's been a pretty hectic time over the last month. Those of you who came to 2 meetings in 1 week, we had a bunch of weeks like that. So we've been looking at the schedule and trying to keep it moving, keep the momentum going, but add a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more time for just being able to meet with you and get back and produce the kind of product that we are all proud of. So what we're going to be doing, we're not changing the meeting for the next CAC. That will be June 21st, and that will be focused on transportation. And it will include comments from the Sustainability Committee that has already met, and a future meeting of the Transportation Committee. And I think that there is a doodle poll out for June 2nd or June
2nd and 7th.
So then we will move on to the land use issues. So that the way that'll work is we'll meet with Transportation Committee, Subcommittee, then we'll meet with the CAC on the transportation issues. And then we will also continue to work on land use. We are scheduling a Sustainability Committee meeting on the land use issues to find those, to really explore those policy links between the SCAP and land use issues. And we have a doodle poll out, or will shortly, for June 13th or 14th. And then we'll come back with that information to the Land Use Subcommittee later in June and move the discussion of land use with the entire CAC again in July or the summer meeting. So we're just trying to, all you'll be looking at in June is transportation, and so we're preparing for that. And then in July, you'll be looking at land use. And we're trying to make sure that there's no more than one meeting a week for your benefit and for ours, because we discovered that 2 meetings a week and being able to digest and get back and really think that through and give you time was just not working out ideally. So any questions on that? That sounds good to everybody? Well, good, great. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. I think in terms of today's schedule, the schedule for this afternoon, we had some comments and some additional information on land use that we wanted to introduce when we get to the land use issue. So I think we can defer Andrew's discussion till that point and move on now to the recommendations on the community services and facilities element. And then if the co-chairs would be willing to bounce it back to us for a little bit on land use so we can fill in on some information and give a little bit more background, that would be great.
If I may, I just also wanted to add that Kristen O'Kane is here, Assistant Director of Community Services, to speak on the CSF element. She's here to answer questions as needed.
Welcome. The other thing I will add is I think Elena may want to take a break between the 2 items to take a photograph.
Oh, okay. That
Andrew?
didn't work out, huh? So we can move on to community services.
Yes, Andrew?
Oh, I think actually, Andrew, you guys can move on with community services. I think we want to get it bounced back to Andrew and I at land use.
Okay.
Well, I can also add that the CSF element was revised following multiple meetings with our Community Services subcommittee. We've had multiple discussions as well with our Community Services department, with Kristen and Rob. And we've also, there are portions of it that relate to employee training. We've also consulted with our Rumi, our Chief People Officer. And so what you have in front of you would be the result of a lot of work based on direction from both the CAC as well as the last City Council hearing in terms of reducing and consolidating the policies and programs within this document. So with that, turn it back.
Thank you. In your packet, you have the most recent draft of the community services element. Perhaps it would be appropriate for the subcommittee to first weigh in. And I'd also be interested in learning how many people have comments on it. So after the subcommittee weighs in, we'll look for hands. And who would like to speak from the subcommittee? Anyone? Don?
I don't think there's much, excuse me, there's much more to say than Elena said. I think it's been reduced quite efficiently. I think that it's not the length of the verbiage that's left in here as an issue. I think it might be some of the actual words themselves that may need to be edited at this point. I think that we've had good collaboration, and we've done our best to consolidate what we heard from the CAC and from the council. So I think it's getting very close to be a work product that we can publicize.
Thank you, Don. Is there, Heidi, or Jennifer, thank you.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. I agree, I think it's in pretty good shape, but needs a little bit more editing, not made there, a couple of duplications, things like that. There's a map on the first page that shows the parks and open space and the big picture of the city. It's page C17, I guess. And parks and open space should be separated out. I think we discussed that several times. So a couple of things like that to follow up on. Also, I wanted to clarify on page C35, where it talks about the National Parks and Recreation Standards. We did not discuss that policy in this committee. I think council reserved it for future discussion, but just to keep you up to speed on what the Parks and Rec Commission is doing or thinking around that policy is to retain those standards as a guide, but eliminate the distinction between district and neighborhood parks, because it doesn't quite fit the way we use our parks. So I think the direction they're likely to head for the Parks and Rec master plan is to retain the 4 acres per 1,000 standard, and with a policy that parkland will expand with population, that it'll be widely distributed, that it'll be of sufficient size to meet the needs of neighborhoods as well as the broader community, and at probably a half-mile radius. So just to bring you up to speed on what they're thinking is going on there.
Thank you. Anyone else from the committee? If not, does Bonnie?
I think our remarks at the last meeting, we said what we had done and what we consolidated and streamlined and emphasized the new emphasis on inclusivity and diversity, reaching out to all people. But I wanted to ask Jennifer, Elaine submitted something just a few minutes ago about parks and different sources of ways to think about parks, and I just wondered if the Parks and Recreation Commission is looking at other places for guidelines that would be applicable to Palo Alto, and if there's something we might want to say in the comp plan that gives us some flexibility over the next 15 years in thinking about parks.
I haven't seen Elaine's comments yet, but, okay. I'd be happy to pass them on to the commission and make sure they consider them.
Also, Robin, if you'd reflect in the minutes that Bob Winslow has joined us. Anyone else have comments on this element from the committee or anyone else? Doria?
I'm not on the committee, but I have comments.
That's fine. And then Arthur, anyone else? Annette, Elaine?
I'm impaired.
Elaine, Whitney?
So I agree with Jen's comment about the map. There needs to be a distinction. I would like to be something that I would like there to be something in about libraries that says we should have them all open the same amount of time. There's no reason that College Terrace should not be open more hours, at least as many as the downtown. It's just that was a austerity thing during the recession. There's no need for that anymore. I think that there's a weird typo. I'm sure that'll just be fixed on policy C3.6. It doesn't make sense what it says there. Policy C3.1, where appropriate, maintain existing community facilities and public ownership. I would just take out where appropriate. Should just say maintain it.
Sorry, I tried to keep it
And
away from you.
finally, on the very last page, policy C510 and C511, I find those to be like increase opportunities for access to healthy food, including fresh foods, and encourage and reward healthy eating for city employees. I find that to be fairly inclusive about people's personal habits and shouldn't be in the comp plan.
Thank you, Doria. Annette, and then Elaine.
Just to highlight the comments that I made, there are two places that have maps that indicate neighborhoods, and so I think that there's never any mention of the neighborhood association, so I think that they need to be added under community partnerships and in a couple of other places. It just seems odd to have them just stuck out there without any explanation. I really was fascinated with this idea of working with property owners for meeting spaces, and I'm not really sure that I think the policy is necessary. It's sort of like mission impossible. Why that? Looking at this and a lot of other of the elements, it seems like a lot of clauses are just stuck in to be comprehensive for everyone and anyone. And I'm sure that will be true with a lot of the sustainability issues. It's certainly true with a lot of these healthy choice kinds of things. For example, a policy that I don't think works is senior services and the school system.
Which number, I'm sorry?
It is policy C1.15. It's working with schools to do a number of things, but senior services doesn't seem to be a fit for me. Senior services in parks, I'm not really sure what that means. I've never seen any, maybe that's my limitation, but it's great to have that, but they're certainly not advertised, so I'm not sure what programs are in parks. So I had a question about that. In goal C4, there's a very lofty goal, which is great, to have new public facilities serve all neighborhoods. I think it should say serve all residents, because there's some discussion about what is a neighborhood. Is it a homeowner's? Is it a defined neighborhood? And so I would, and some of the neighborhoods are very, very tiny. They're minuscule, only a couple hundred houses perhaps. So I like the idea of a more expansive idea. And that's probably it.
Thank you. Elaine, and then Whitney.
So thanks, Bonnie, for alluding to my comments, and I'm sorry I sent them so late, but I'll just share the quick parks thought that I had, if I can pull that up again. I just wanted to ask us to consider to include other types of community gathering spaces, parks, public gardens, or I guess what I would call small-scale public landscapes that might also fall under the, I mean, it could be construed as a park, but in effect, it's a landscaped intervention. And then I'm just worried that when we set, I don't know the specifics of the National Recreation and Park Association standards, but I just worry that if the minimum threshold is half acre, we're precluding a lot of different types of, nice landscape interventions that can be great places for people of all ages to rest, relax, gather. So, I mean, just speaking for myself, when I was a new mom with a kid, it was always nice to kind of wander around and find this like unexpected little oasis somewhere that wasn't half an acre, but might have been a few thousand feet. I think people who work from home, or people who may not have jobs but are out and about during the day, it's always kind of nice to kind of stumble upon these things. And one thing, I guess, a good example I can think of is the Water Tower Park downtown, next to the right across from the train tracks. I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful place if you just need a few minutes to clear your head. But it's definitely not half an acre. It's probably like a 10,000 square foot lot. So I hope that we don't preclude some of these really thoughtful, wonderful, landscaped park-like places out of the community services element just because it doesn't meet a certain size threshold.
Thank you. Jen, did you want to respond?
I just wanted to respond quickly. I agree, we should be looking at all the spaces we can think of, and certainly we do have some parks now that are under half an acre. We have Lytton Plaza, Cogswell Plaza. I don't know if they're over, I don't know exactly their size, but we have a variety of different settings that are parks. It's not just a place where you have grass and a playground. And Water Tower is another great idea. I think we should be eyeing places like that to dedicate as parkland to preserve that exact function regardless of what the size is. So.
Thank you. Whitney, and then Alex.
Under planning for parks and community facilities, there's a goal C4. It's planned for a future in which our parks, open spaces, libraries, public art, and community facilities thrive and adapt to growth and change in Palo Alto. So I just had a comment on its policy C-4.8. It's written, partner with property owners to facilitate public access to privately owned open spaces and facilities. So as it's written, this is allowing public access across private property. So think of this, if this was your property, it's not really, there's a lot of legal issues with it from a liability standpoint and legal issues about access across private property. So I would suggest changing the language from facilitate, which could get misused over time, to encourage.
Thank you. Alex, and then Arthur, and is there anyone else who would like to speak? Adrian.
I just had a question on C27. There was policy C, or 1.28, supporting a provision funding for services for persons with disabilities. It says it's eliminated. It says previously this was policy C19. One of my questions in general, and I apologize not for reading this more thoroughly, but when we see something like this that's removed, how are we to understand if it's been picked up somewhere else or whether it's being completely removed from the part of the plan? And is that the case here?
Elena, maybe you could help us with that? And
Page 27.
Elaine, either one. You're on page 27.
Yeah.
Policy C-1.19. And it used to be policy 1.28, which has been stricken. And if I'm paraphrasing correctly, Alex, you're wondering, are the concerns of that particular policy being picked up in other policies or other parts of the comp plan?
It looks like it's just been moved to the next page, policy C 1.23.
Okay.
Can I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just to clarify as well, at the end of the community services and facilities element, there's sort of an errata sheet that lists some of the policies that were in the version that went to City Council that have been, that the subcommittee has proposed or recommended to shift to other elements. So if you don't see one of your ideas in the current redraft, it could be that it's on this list and it's been recommended to be shifted to another place for inclusion in the comp plan, just not in this particular element.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh, I did not. We'll do Adrian and then Bob.
Thank you. I think there was a really good job in reducing this whole section by a fair bit, which is generally helpful. Two quick comments. I'm somewhat skeptical of policies without programs. I think it allows a bit too much leeway. So I'd encourage us to look at a lot of these policies which don't have programs to back them up. I think it's too easy to attribute city business to a general policy when there's no program to actually say what that means and how it should run on the ground. And then just one program I'd actually like to see added back is C1.10. It's just asking the city to include metrics to measure various departments on their performance. I think this integrates pretty well with some other efforts amid the city right now and general trends in public government. So I'd personally like to see that added back in. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob, and then Arthur, if there's no other comments.
My comments are, actually was on.
I was trying to make it green.
Yours turns green.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I was trying to help you.
no good deed goes unpunished. Okay. So my remark is just to remind staff or whoever the writers of this were towards comments I had made a while ago on the usability and the format of the document. I'm concerned that the structure of this is taking final form, and I don't like the form of the document. I find that it's way too much white space in it. I don't understand why there's so much margin. I find the little pictures with cute little captions as confusing, and had shared a model of a presentation a little bit like the Santa Cruz model, which I think we felt had better usability. The usability of the comp plan is unclear. I think the use case is not, I feel like this is being written like a welcome to Palo Alto. It shows up in your packet when you arrive that you want to read the comp plan. And instead, I feel like its use case is more like used by council, used by staff, used by people who are trying to make decisions. And so the design of it should be a little bit more expedient and oriented to the people that are using it, as opposed to, you know, this, there's sort of a self-flattery aspect to it that turns me off a bit. And so I still wanted to remind staff about that, and it feels again like those remarks have not been factored into what I'm seeing now. So it's not merely a web presentation, but it's how it comes out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, Arthur, Don, forgive me.
So just a question. So Elaine or Elena, do we have another community services subcommittee meeting scheduled? I mean, there's a lot of comments here. Do we need to meet to discuss them?
No, we don't have one scheduled, but certainly if there are certain items that the CAC would like to delegate to the subcommittee for us to bring forward, kind of similar to what we did before, that's certainly a possibility.
Well, I'm looking at all the comments that were made. It would seem that there was enough that we should go through as a subcommittee and do something with them. Does the rest of the subcommittee agree, or the important people on the subcommittee?
Or even the unimportant ones. Bonnie?
I don't know if I could look at this again. I kind of glaze over. I think staff consultants can take these in, and they're good comments. They're not really controversial, and there's so much other work to be done. I would hate to burden the staff and the subcommittee members with these the comments. I'm sure they could. What we saw today was another tracked version. It certainly isn't the final version. And people pointed out where some programs or policies were repeated and there's some words missing. But you can fix that. You don't need the subcommittee to put a rubber stamp of approval on it. That's my personal feeling. I'd rather focus on the rest of the elements.
Are there other comments there? Len?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the consultants can insert that information and let us see it, share the document with us so that we can ensure that it is done appropriately. And so I don't know as if another subcommittee meeting is necessary on this one.
Perhaps before we continue the discussion on procedure here, I'd like Arthur who has comments on the content, and then let's return to procedure, and maybe Elaine can help, can weigh in. Arthur?
Thank you. So a couple of things. First of all, I think that the idea of having small parks makes sense. I think the wording of this sort of indicates as small as a quarter acre. I don't think that that's restrictive to exactly how small they are. It's an example. I think the ratios are important. I think that policies without programs are still important because policy lives on even if the program completes. And so I think that makes sense. There are a number of important things, I think, in the narrative. I look most closely at the narrative. The narrative says that the issues about payment for these are moved into the land use element. They're not in the land use element. They are in the community services and facilities element. So that part of it on page C2 is erroneous. There's a paragraph that says, in addition, the city is committed to providing new facilities in areas that are underserved, et cetera. That paragraph should be reinstated. I don't know why that paragraph was deleted. That was not a discussion that we had at the CAC level. A paragraph on the bottom of page 9. It says, in addition, the city is committed to providing new facilities in areas that are underserved and in areas where change is expected in the future. In particular, I think that there should be a sentence which we've talked about, and the idea is add a mention for the need of additional parkland to support increased housing density. As you increase density, you need more parks because people with single-family residential have backyards. People in dense housing with limited private open space don't. They really need to have shared space, like shared parkland. In addition, I think that we should make sure that what's distributed is not merely a track changes version, but also a clean version. Sometimes there are inconsistencies. It's hard to figure out exactly what the corrected version is. There are underscores and strikeouts. And I noticed that in the earlier thing, in the community, in the land use element, there are things that were struck out that were actually still in the text, so I'm kind of confused about that. So we need to make sure there's a clean version. Also, I noticed that somebody did editorial change and removed what is called the serial comma, and I think that that does not help readability. I think it's an editorial change. The serial comma is when you have three items, you say X, comma, Y, comma, and Z. I think that removing that is an editorial change that I think actually hurts readability rather than improving it. Thank you.
All right, let's go back to the procedural topics. Elaine,
Yeah.
not Elena.
Yeah, that's going to be part of the fun. We just wanted to point out that we have planned in the schedule in the future a time to bring back the final kind of revisions, pull all these things together. And then we also had heard the comment at the previous meeting and have noted it about format, and I think at some of the subcommittee meetings too. So we haven't, we plan to, there's some future issues that are scheduled for the future, and those fall in that. So, I mean, of course, if the subcommittee would like to see it again, that's completely up to the subcommittee. However, we do have it in the schedule that there'll be a time where you kind of pull them all together and look at them in the context of how each of them has been, you know, it's a chance to look at the format, look at the integration, and take a final run through the policies.
That's, I think, next spring or thereabouts.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
least today.
Yeah.
So with that, may I hear a motion to support the subcommittee's draft and incorporate the comments that will then return to the larger CAC for review and approval to move to council? And as someone is most welcome to wordsmith my suggested motion.
I move to do that.
Thank you, Elaine. Is there a second? Don? Discussion. Would either of you like to speak to your motion? Don?
I think the idea that it goes back to the staff with these comments and submitted written comments is important, because the only one that I think is maybe not contentious, but is this whole idea of gathering spaces, small parks. And what I've written is, instead of just talking about 12 or 14% growth in the community or whatever it is, we need to look at the fact that the forecast is the population of children is going down, population of retirees is going from 12% to 20%. So I think in planning parks, some granularity in this document needs to be considered. And if staff can do that, I'm happy with that, but if it doesn't come out right, then I would suggest that we do need to subcommittee again. But for now, I'll support the motion this way.
Bob?
I'm not as good on the procedural stuff, but I just kind of had a question. And maybe, so Arthur was, I don't mean, worked up that a paragraph in the introduction was taken out and wanted it put back. And what I'm trying to understand is, do those paragraphs mean anything? Do they have any force where it goes, this is a principle? Because I haven't, it was more just, I haven't like been thinking of the introduction as binding, and then Arthur brings that up like, wait, this is binding. So what's the point of the narrative, and how does it get applied in the planning? Because I thought it was the policy, the program, and the element, and nothing else operated.
More
Thanks.
what the city's policy would be.
Yeah, in general, the introductory text doesn't have the weight of the goals, policies, and programs. So we think it's useful, and oftentimes the council or the staff can look at the text to help interpret the policies and programs, but it certainly doesn't carry the same weight.
I'm not sure that helps you, Bob. I think what, and staff's welcome to weigh in here, is that staff will take that comment, evaluate it relative to the overall thrust of the narrative, and make a recommendation. If it is excluded, they should tell us why. If it's included, they should tell us why, and then we'll review it about a year from now.
It was more, just, I think the clarity helped me because I didn't want, part of me had an aspiration to remove non-essential text because it would bungle the public discussion, because if all of a sudden someone comes up and goes, but it says this in the introduction and that conflicts with the policy, then you like, oh, what are we doing here, folks? You know, so that was my concern, and that would be my input, but I don't think it affects the motion on the floor, so I apologize for bringing it up, but I was just a little confused. Thank you.
Bonnie?
Trying to figure out how it works. So looking at the language that Arthur was concerned about, that it was deleted, it wasn't deleted. It was it's someplace else in the narrative. So if you read you'll see the language or similar language. I think the direction from council was to make things a little shorter. And so look around. If you see something that was deleted, maybe it's been rephrased elsewhere. And I hope when staff hears the comments that came from us like that, they'll say, oh, well, somebody made that statement, but their concern is addressed, and you'll know that.
So again, I think staff will make an evaluation, make a recommendation, and we'll learn about that.
And
Sorry.
One other comment, Annette mentioned something about seniors and parks. Well, seniors use parks, and parks could be designed to accommodate the needs of seniors. The Magical Bridge Playground was to accommodate certain needs, and there may be an opportunity for that. So I would not delete references to seniors when talking about parks or PAUSD.
And then Arthur, then I'd like to get to the motion.
You know, I don't think there is a program. Certainly seniors enjoy parks, just like everyone else. And I was just talking to Jen. We just came out with this magical playground, which is wonderful. And that really does address the disabled and I think it would be great, and I don't know if we could add a specific program in here, is to develop some sort of space in parks for seniors. Actually, other cities, and I've got a wonderful picture of a park in England that was designed just for senior use. So I think it would be awesome to have a specialized area within a park. And this might be a place to include it. That would make me feel better about having the items in here that talk about programs. So the program should look something to the fact, and I'm not great on wordsmithing, would be to investigate the ability or the location to design areas in parks for senior use. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that. It sort of talks to what Bonnie was saying. I think it'd be awesome.
Great. Arthur?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, operationally, I would suggest that the way that this be handled is that staff take the comments, they produce a draft, they circulate among the subcommittee who may have comments that they want to circulate back with staff, and then this come back as a clean document next time with also track changes. One of the problems is in the past we've had disposition tables indicating what happened with which. This time there was a lot of changes with no disposition table. So that I found myself making comments saying, this thing, I don't want it deleted, and then I read 3 pages later that it's there. So therefore, it was hard to figure out where things got moved to. It made it hard to understand what the comments were and how things were addressed. So I'm not sure how to deal with that issue of disposition. I think that there is a legitimate question of what we expect the differences in demographics for Palo Alto to be versus the demographics for Santa Clara County. And I think that people have predicted many times that the student population of Palo Alto will go down. It seems to have been increasing. I noticed the school district has basically said that they expect the population to go down, but they're predicting a lot fewer homes than Palo Alto's lowest scenario predicts. And so I think it's, maybe the percentage will go down if we have the population going up, but I expect that the amount of school-age students will probably not go down. It'll probably be slowly increasing depending on what kind of housing we build. So I don't think we should expect the schools to get any less crowded than they already are.
Again, Amy, you had your flag up, and then we'll get to the motion.
I just went back to this draft complaint that was dated April 2014, and I found that this table is very useful. It's a disposition table, and on the table, it tallied the all existing policies and programs, and has a table that says, does it move the two other elements complete, or is it no change? Is it edited? Is it split? Is it merged? Does status change? Or is, and then it maps it to where the new policies are. I found that to be very useful, and I thought that maybe that is something, it would be helpful if we incorporate that into what we are currently using, so that we don't just find a program disappear and don't know where it goes to.
Andrew.
Just to speak to that, actually, council has also asked for the same thing, a crosswalk table at the end of the day that lets them know where the policies in the current adopted comp plan have ended up. And so, when the element gets presented to council. Not on every draft, for something that goes to the council.
Right. So I think the plan would be from what the existing comprehensive plan is to what's recommended by the but not every version we would do a table like that.
Since the council saw the last draft, you may wish to have a crosswalk from the council's draft as well as from the current comp plan. In fact, it may be as important to do, because they've seen it, they want to know what happened to it from there. And so if you don't give them the draft from the draft that they've seen, it'll be hard for them to understand whether their direction was followed.
With that, will you all raise your hand if you're in agreement with the motion? We have one, not Whitney. Really? No, you're absolutely right. I think the motion was to support the subcommittee's draft element, their draft element, and for staff to incorporate the comments today into a final clean draft that will then be reviewed. And I'm going to amend it with Arthur's suggestion, and that that clean draft be circulated among the subcommittee for review, and then ultimately back to the full committee about a year from now, when we come back and look at the formatting of that.
I think we can bring it back somewhere between now and I'm not sure we can guarantee for the next meeting because of the workflow, but we'll bring it back.
Okay.
We want to give the subcommittee time to take a look at it, and so, we could bring it back in an interim step.
Doria.
I'd just like to add to that the subcommittee, if they need to, can have another meeting.
Absolutely.
So that's in the motion.
That's fine. Jennifer, then we're gonna vote.
I just want to clarify, is it going to go back to council then? So the subcommittee reviews it, makes sure everything's as we discussed, and then it goes to council before it comes back to the full CAC a year from now? Is that correct?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Hillary, but I think the plan is to circulate it to the subcommittee, then send it to the entire CAC, this entire committee, and then hold it and do a consolidation and then send it to the council. Now, that plan could change in the meantime, but that's the current plan. So it wouldn't go to the council till the whole thing was consolidated.
And the amendment to what we're voting on says that if deemed, we can have a subcommittee.
Right.
That is correct.
Because circulating it and then writing 3 pages of comments probably takes longer than.
All understand what the motion is here? All those in favor, raise your hands. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Did I get everybody? 18. All opposed? And any abstentions? And we have 3 people missing. All right, thanks very much. We will take a break for, what do you need, Elaine? 5 minutes? We'll take a brief break for 5 minutes. Okay. And forgive me, your name again was? From the Community Services?
And just to note,
Kristen?
I mean, there are 2
Thank
people
you for
not here.
coming.
Do you care that
All right, looks like we have almost everybody. Missing Lisa and Annette and Ellen. Andrew. All right, I think we are essentially all here. Let's reconvene. Andrew, you want to give us an overview, an introduction to the land use discussion we're about to have?
There we go, it's on. Yes, so since the April CAC meeting, the land use subcommittee met twice, and they did a very detailed review of the programs and policies under goals L1 to L3, which is where several of the most complex issues are. In a minute, we're going to ask the land use subcommittee members to speak and provide a summary of their discussions, but I wanted to take a minute here to highlight the good work that they did. They reached consensus on, they focused primarily, I think, on streamlining and clarifying the details of the policies and programs under these 3 goals. And they reached consensus on several important areas, including the need to include policies and programs that contain development within the urban service area, that enhance the livability of neighborhoods, that address housing affordability and housing diversity. And also, they agreed that performance standards that address the adverse impacts of growth, including traffic and air quality and noise, would be a valuable addition. There were, however, 2 areas where there was not a clear consensus. And so what the subcommittee did was to try and develop a range of options, which are included in your packet here for consideration. And there were 2 areas like that. The first was building heights, which the full CAC has discussed at previous meetings in depth. And so what the subcommittee did was to develop 4 options. And today we feel that we would like to poll you on your preferred option. And shortly the co-chairs are going to explain the procedure. I think we're going to have a discussion of the options, and then the co-chairs will explain a procedure for voting or polling on the preferred option or options for building heights. The second topic was non-residential growth management. And this, of course, really refers to policy L8 from the current adopted comp plan, which establishes that cap of 3.2 million square feet of non-residential square feet in 9 monitored areas, and program L8 from the current adopted comp plan, which establishes a cap of 350,000 square feet in the downtown area. And again here, the subcommittee was not able to reach a consensus, and so what they did was to develop a range of options. Now, the full committee hasn't discussed those caps on this particular issue in as much detail, and so we don't feel that at this point we're ready to do polling or voting on the options developed. Please consider them as preliminary options. We'd like to get your feedback tonight, and we'll the subcommittee will meet again to further refine these options and bring them back for voting at a later date. I also wanted to point out that in the staff report that you have in front of you, there's a breakdown that explains how much square footage is remaining in the downtown cap. And then in the materials on your table, we also have some additional information tonight that explains and breaks down how much is remaining in the 3.25 million square foot cap. So you might like to consider that in your discussion of non-residential growth management tonight. So I think what we'd like to do is, as we normally do, go around the horn and give everyone a couple of minutes to weigh in on the policies and programs under goals L1 through L3, as we normally do. And please, in your comments, if you could indicate which of the options for building heights you prefer and why, that would be great. And also if you could comment on the options and the ideas put forward for non-residential growth management, that would also, I think, help to move the ball forward.
Okay, we are going to do this as we have done before. We'll have the subcommittee speak first, and then we will go around the room starting from my left all the way around, and then we are going to vote as requested on the 4 options for height. The likelihood is high that well, actually, before I say that, the way that we wanted to do the voting on the 4 options was what's referred to as approval voting. So you can vote for as many options as you want. And we'll be counting hands each time we do it so that we can get an understanding of sort of preferences between these. And then we will have, I suspect we will have conversation, we'll open up to the larger body as people desire, and we'll likely have some conversation around variations of the 4, and if there's additional study or conversation that needs to be done there, we can pursue that at that time. Bonnie, you had a procedural question?
Should we focus our comments only on goals L1 through L3? Because it seemed as if the goals after that were not really massaged at all.
That's
so
correct.
Even though we submitted written comments, we don't need to address those now. Is
That's
that correct?
correct. We're really trying to focus on 1 through 3. There's going to be how many more subcommittee meetings?
There's another subcommittee meeting coming up. These were tough issues.
Yeah. And who knows, there may even be more. Len, question or comment from you?
Will those absent tonight be able to be counted in the vote, in the polling?
Yeah, I actually got a debrief from Shani on her opinions. Arthur is... I'm sorry, Arthur? And she's given me her votes. We don't actually have a policy around proxy voting here, but I can share at least her comments and where she would have voted. Unless there's a suggestion there someplace, I would simply record.
Well,
her
there's
comments.
only a couple more absent people. I wonder if we could, if the chairs could send them an email and ask for
them?
their vote.
Sure.
Yeah, and just
Yeah,
add that to
absolutely.
the total.
Yeah, that would be Shani, Lydia, and Jason. We could ask them. Jennifer?
I'm curious about the purpose of the voting.
It is to get a flavor. Apparently, the subcommittee has come up with these 4 options that they've distilled from our conversations prior to today. It's to give them some direction on those 4 options. I suspect they will also get important feedback on the discussion around those 4 options as well. But it's a way of focusing us on those options, as well as then the variants that may appear subsequent.
So I'm under the impression that the subcommittee is not, and maybe you all can correct me, doesn't expect to reach a single recommendation on these topics.
I think
we're
that's
not-
true, and I think the subcommittees can end up proposing, correct me if I'm wrong, subcommittee, but they will end up refining the options that will then be presented to the council as a result of this. But it's a way for them to get a flavor for where there's dominance and where there isn't,
So I think
and which ones to further refine or
just, well, I'll wait for my
support.
turn to come around to speak for
Dan,
Okay.
could I just interject? I mean,
Yeah.
I think we've all understand the council's interest in getting minority and majority opinions. I think the subcommittee has done a fantastic job, but it's telling that they didn't land with two options. There are 4 options here, and it could be that we just take a vote and we report to the council what the position was in support, how much the support there was for each. But it could also be that based on the conversations this evening, the subcommittee wants to further refine the options, and we'll have to see that.
One question.
Lisa?
On the process. You said you could vote as many times as you want. I'm thinking we should actually each vote once.
So the thought is that we'll ask for a vote for each one of the 4, and you can vote once for each one of those 4 or not, if you support it
So
or not.
the
Because
question-
they're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
At option 1, 2, 3, and 4, you can vote for all of them?
You could vote for all of them.
That's not going to get us anywhere.
Yes, but if you were to vote for, say, for discussion's sake, options 1 and 2, or options 3 and 4, you could vote for each of them. And this way, you wouldn't have to select, well, I like this one and I like that one as well. You can,
Certainly your call. I think
Yeah.
before we're done, we should probably do one vote. That's just, you pick one. And then if it's spread completely, then I can.
They are actually mutually exclusive.
well, the issue, they are mutually exclusive, but the issue is you could be happy with several of them. And therefore, we want to know which ones people have support for and which ones people don't have support for. And so there's a whole bunch of voting theory that talks about how you narrow down among multiple choices. And it turns out that when you have multiple choices, for which people might want several and might want not others, approval voting tends to get the best outcome in terms of getting that weighting.
We thought we'd try it anyway. So with that, who from the subcommittee would like to lead off with comments? Anyone? Steve, excuse me.
For me is getting this to turn on. Is it on?
Yes.
Oh, already a success. I want to thank Andrew and Elena and Elaine, and that is a tongue twister, because I have an Elaine over here. It's been a very collegial subcommittee. 4 people in particular have made time in your ridiculous schedule to attend every minute, Doria and Annette and Hamilton and Amy, and I really appreciate their effort. I don't believe in limits. I believe in performance standards when I think of housing. I will vote for the unrestricted option. I think of the 2 buildings across the street from me that are both higher than 65 feet, that are lovely, dense, walkable, urban areas. I think, when I think of the lower limits, I think that prevents Channing House or all of the senior care facilities that Nielsen Buchanan came to our committee and talked about previously. When I think about why that might be feasible, I look at Whitney and say, we can make a deal at the shopping center and near the medical center in the heart of the research park. I don't know whether Whitney agrees, but I have ideas where height limits wouldn't be intrusive on any neighborhood. So I don't like limits. Similarly, I don't like limits on anything. I like performance standards. I like determining all kinds of growth, residential and non-residential, depending on how we succeed in the RPP and the TMA and in impacting impacts, whether driverless cars and Uber and shuttles can reduce the traffic impacts. I believe in addressing impacts in a comp plan, not numbers, that we should go with what we can find we can mitigate. So I'm going to vote for the least restrictive options to preserve the choice of council down the line.
Annette?
I can go next, and I don't know if you want all of the comments in all three goals, but I'll just ramble on for a minute. I felt really strongly that the shopping centers, the three neighborhood commercial shopping centers, should be distinguished from the CN zones. In the program L1.7, I was really concerned about working with property owners to identify barriers. That, to me, seems like giveaways. I'm always worried about that. In a new policy, program L5, this is formerly L5, now L20, use performance measures and architectural standards. I love the idea of architectural standards, but I frankly don't, I think we need to ratchet up what we actually use for architectural standards, because I think we're sorely missing them in many cases, and I'm not really sure about performance measures. I'm not sure what we are trying to do with L25, update the zoning code to limit the displacement of existing retail. That, to me, seems to be all based on rents, and I'm not sure what the city can do. Maybe we should have a program for that. Another policy, support efforts to preserve rental housing units in existing neighborhoods. I think it's the rents that are going up as opposed to policies that we can have. Over 40% of the city is rental now. So I think that we do need rental units, so I support the concept, but I'm not sure if it should be a policy. We look at housing uses. I really support what council was saying about the loss of second units with the redevelopment of the very, very large properties for something like village or clustered housing, et cetera. And I'm still concerned about second units on very, very tiny lots. There's so many out there now, and we don't code enforce them, and that really worries me. I actually am pleased with the new program L56 that talks about the minimizing the amount of signage throughout our city, which I think is really important to do. And finally, on building heights, I feel very strongly that we should keep to the 55-foot limit, and I'm going to stand on that position. I think, as Doria said before, that you know, we can develop an awful lot. We have a lot of capacity there that we haven't used, so I'm going to vote for option 1.
Annette, you had mentioned policy and signage. Was that 50 or 55?
Sorry about this.
That's okay. You can get back to us.
I think it's 56.
L56.
L56.
Okay.
And I think did you mean to say you support the 50-foot height limit or 55? You said 50. Thank you.
Anyone else from the subcommittee? Doria?
Couple of comments. Most importantly, I support the 50-foot height limit. We have not even begun to exhaust the potentiality of what the 50-foot height limit can do across Palo Alto. So until we do that, there's no reason to raise a height limit. It has not been demonstrated as factual in anywhere that I've seen that raising the height limit will either lower the price or creates more attractive architecture. This picture that staff gave us was, it's not a criticism, but it's just an observation, because I know how hard staff is working, but you can't read the heights on here. So it's absolutely useless. Moving around in the program, performance measures are useful, and we should get those, but you can't mitigate away growth, the negative impacts of growth. They're going to be there. Everybody has admitted that. Hillary Gittleman said that to council a couple months ago. More people, more housing means more impacts, more traffic, more parking. Driverless cars, just out today, there's an article, I forget where it was, that driverless cars will likely increase congestion on our streets. So we had a lot of discussion in the definitions about single-family residential, and staff told us that what that means is R1, R2, and RMD. That doesn't seem to make sense to me, and I thought we had talked about being more specific with those land use definitions, and maybe there should be single family, which is R1, the other two low-density residential designations, and then 15, 30, and 40 would be multi-housing. Let's see. Goal L1, a well-designed, compact, and resilient city, blah, blah, blah. The first policy, L1, is okay, and then the other policies contradict it, and it seems very biased towards development, the whole rest of that, which I don't think is appropriate. Performance measures. There's a new program, reevaluate development standards in the C zones, CC, CS, CD. We had talked about that quite a bit, and it was felt by a lot of us that that was too open-ended, and that if we were going to rethink the development standards and land uses in the C zones, that it needed really detailed discussion. It should be discussion by this group, not by somebody in the future unnamed. I'll stop there.
Okay, if there's Hamilton, and then we'll go around the room.
Sure, I'm really happy with how the subcommittee has been working together, despite a very diverse set of views that I think could capture both ends of the spectrum. Steve, let me know when you're done. We've actually done a good job of working through all the hard sections. Essentially 1 through 3 have 90% of the controversial issues. And we've actually agreed on a ton in it. So I'm pretty happy with how the subcommittee is working together. I feel like there's still a lot of room and zoning envelope left for the housing. So I actually think that this time around we don't need to raise the height limit. I think it's actually a hot issue for 2030. Don't forget, growth doesn't stop in 2030. We got to get the next 15 years of growth. So we don't want to use it all up in the next 15 years. One thing I would say is I'd like to make sure if we do give any height increases that we require a higher percentage of BMR. It's an incredible wealth transfer to the real estate developer when we do a height increase, but the point of that is actually to benefit the people who are having trouble renting. And so we want to increase the amount of percentage of BMR so that the renters can benefit as well. I want to change subjects for a second. You know, I'm a little concerned about the EIR. For me, I don't understand as a council member how you can pick an option if it wasn't one of the options you actually studied. So there's a lot of talk about bookends. So if you have a very high housing growth number and a very low housing growth number, that doesn't really tell me whether the middle housing growth number is going to mitigate the impacts. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm also concerned that the council is being asked to make decisions, like come up with housing numbers to study without actually having seen the land use element and the transportation element. So I want to make sure they're better synced, because I don't want them to be in the process of making a lot of decisions without having seen the work we're doing. So I think that there's more opportunity there. And then the last thing I just say, and this comment's for Hillary, my understanding was Go Big also included net zero. It wasn't that we weren't going to do net zero for it. So those are my comments.
Thanks. We have 2 other members, Amy, and then Jen.
Sure, thank you. The subcommittee met 2 times, and I think that we are planning for the 3rd time. We have this group that is assigned to the subcommittee, but I think because of the time of the day that we met, some of them cannot really make it. So I really think that it might be just something that we need to take into consideration when we constructed subcommittee meetings. But at any rate, I wanted to voice my support for lifting this 50 feet building limit height limit. And I wanted to get back to this invaluable the information that our co-chair provided back when we met in April. And this number, it gave us the historic background perspective. And then there was also a rep from the League of Women Voters that came to speak before us, that they felt that they expressed concerns that the commercial development cap will discourage the housing that might be part of a mixed use. And I think that what we are talking about lifting the height limits, really it is because we have a huge concern about affordability, and the way that we can make it better is to relax that limit, which I think that it's about time that we correct that one. And just the city's own survey from April 14, a key findings from citywide voter survey that 76% of the people that was polled says the cost of housing is seen by far the most urgent problem in Palo Alto. 76%, that's 3 in 4. So how do we get to that? I went back to the land use elements, the Bible that we base our comments on. Can I continue? And there is a pie chart, the land use distribution that was compiled in 1996. So I don't know if there is a updated a pie chart that tells us what allocation of what use, but at this chart, 4% was for multiple family use. We need to relax the height so that we can hopefully find a solution for this affordable housing. And also this morning, I just read from Silicon Valley Business Journal that the governor is proposing a housing proposal for affordable housing, and he is proposing something statewide that I'll come back to that one. Thanks.
Okay, Jennifer, then Alex, and then I think that exhausts our subcommittee.
So there are a couple of things that I thought we had agreed on in the subcommittee that didn't show up here, and I missed part of that last meeting, so it may have been superseded, but I thought that in the definition of single-family residential, we had thought to delete the expansion to 14 units per acre in single-family residential zones. That is on page 1 to 2. I think also on page 5, we talked about eliminating the two policies at the bottom of the page that are now labeled L2 and L3 about infill, and the focus on attracting land uses addressing the needs of the community seemed a very vague concept. As far as the height limit options and the L8 options, I think it would be most productive for the subcommittee if this group focused their efforts on how to refine the options so that there's an option there that represents everybody's perspective rather than trying to prioritize them. So I hope that the wording won't be seen as sacrosanct as it's written here. This is the first time we've seen it in this form as well. So help refining those options I think would be extremely helpful. I saw, just skimming through the comments, one comment in Arthur's piece that I liked was the idea of adding a program about additional housing impact fees where housing units are lost or rental units are converted. I'd like to find a way to fit that in. I like Hamilton's idea of setting higher standards for BMR with it in those scenarios where we would raise the height limit. I think there's some opportunity to consolidate the language on the L8 options. There seems to be a lot of commonality about addressing parking, traffic, et cetera, and maybe we could just have a standalone policy that addressed those that would apply to any of the options. There were a couple other questions asked in the staff report about whether exceptions on the cap in non-residential square footage should be allowed for certain uses like retail, public buildings, or community facilities. I don't think that it's appropriate for the comp plan. I'd rather tackle those exceptions on a case-by-case basis, depending on what the project is. The second question was about a range of options that might include raising the cap for the downtown cap. I don't support that. I do support options to convert commercial space to square footage. I support the 50-foot height limit.
Alex?
I missed the last meeting, so I'll keep my comments brief. I do appreciate the work of the team and the staff and trying to make this come together. I agree with a lot of the comments that my friends have made. I think the main thing that still remains elusive to me, and I agree that the issue is affordability, is that there's still, although there seems to be lots of articles and lots of discussion that if you build more housing, you by definition make it more affordable. There's still there seems to be no research or no evidence that we have the capacity to build enough housing to actually affect the price point for housing. I've thrown that out at a number of meetings and I've never seen that answered. So I'm actually, I agree with many of the folks supporting option 1, but I actually am okay with option 2, so that there's some flexibility and to allow for some creative use in terms of the mixed use of retail and housing.
Okay, we'll start around the table. Whitney, and then Elaine.
Okay, I don't think there should be an absolute height limit in the comprehensive plan, and certainly height shouldn't be tied to the concept of a negotiated additional community benefit as it's described in the staff report. If it's in an appropriate place that limits impacts and is well designed, that should be enough. Not everything should be positioned as a means to get something more from a project. It just sets up unrealistic expectations for all parties. The city didn't like the PC zone for that reason in particular. So I wouldn't support trying to put something forward that just continues that practice. So I support increasing heights. There is a zoning ordinance that can limit heights in particular areas when it's needed and when it's appropriate. So there should be an allowance for increased height. As far as the caps go, it seems very confusing to keep referencing a 3.2 million square foot cap that dates back to 1989, at least without explaining in the policy that as of 2015, there's only 1.7 million square feet that is available. So it isn't a 3.2 million square foot cap, and that is not clear in any of the documentation. I think the community continues to think that we're talking about 3.2 million. So over about 30 years, there's been about 1.6 million square feet that's been built in those 9 planning areas. So we just should keep that in mind, and the EIR and comp plan policies will address the impacts of that growth. There is some information in the SUMC, which is the hospital development agreement, that is not included in policy L8, which should be. And if you go back to resolution 9169, it provides some important information, and the SUMC square footage isn't in the cap. I think option 3 is fraught with problems, and without goals or targets is impossible to implement successfully. Having an overall cap split into different planning areas has been problematic in the past, so I'd rather see it as a cumulative to everywhere combined. And option 4, moving towards a net zero as a goal, could be done well if it is a goal and not a mandate. We haven't seen what those targets are, nor have we seen the components and how they would really address the impacts. And just lastly, I wanted to say that what was program L4 has a cap at the shopping center, but this is one where the EIR is not being tied together with the language. If you want to see additional housing at the shopping center, that 80,000 square foot cap would need to be addressed and changed.
Elaine, and then Julia.
Regarding building height limits, ouch! Well then, I'm going to take 4 minutes. So I'm okay with option 3, but maybe from a slightly different perspective than is offered here. I like options 3 and options 4. I think my first preference would be for option 4. But just to go in order, option 3, I think makes a lot of sense actually for design flexibility and for community design, building design. I mean, we have goal L3, which is guiding building design. It could be worded differently, but allowing an additional height, maybe up to 65 feet, would actually provide a lot more flexibility from a design perspective. The ground level is really where all the competition for space happens. And if we want to create a lot of the other things that we've talked about, like public plazas and really nice streetscape amenities and really great sort of ground level experience, it's important to have that trade-off at the ground floor and be able to apply that FAR somewhere else. And if you could bump up and have a nice tower that goes up to 65 feet, that would really enable us to get a lot of more community benefits at the ground level. So while it's not my first choice, I would be for it, and for the reasons of more for community design reasons, not so much for the height limits, because I think I'm in agreement with Steve that I don't think that height limits really are the things that we should be going for. I would reword the new policy and say building heights over 50 feet, not building height limits. It seems to me that, and it's not clear to me whether this is written so that any building height could be considered. If so, I'm actually okay with that. I do think that the performance-based criteria, which we see on the non-residential side, could also be applied to the residential side to, quote unquote, mitigate impacts. But I think we're starting to move towards demographics where walkability, livability, shared systems like car share and bike share and those types of things will really enhance livability but minimize traffic impacts. On non-residential growth management, I'm glad Whitney brought up the square footage cap. If you take a look at how much square footage has been built since 1989 and compare it to the 20 million square feet that we already have, so she said something like 1.5 million square feet has been built, and we already have 20 million. That's only 7% expansion of non-residential square feet since 1989, and I guarantee you our economy and the number of jobs that we've added has not been 7% since 1989. So I'm not entirely convinced that the addition of square footage is what's driving the number of jobs and the growth of jobs. So I do agree with Steve that I think we should focus on performance standards. I might offer a slightly different perspective. Can I just finish? Which is to not to apply this cap citywide, but really to concentrate it. And I wouldn't say concentrate it in the nine zones, because it's not clear to me what those zones are, but concentrate them downtown, concentrate them Cal Ave, where there's transit accessibility, and that's where we can really apply those performance-based standards.
Thank you, Elaine. Julia?
So I agree with the three that just spoke. I originally thought that I would be for an option 3 type policy, but looking at option 4, I think that it makes the most sense, especially if we add some stronger language like Hamilton talked about around BMR. I think it's really important that we listen to the people that have come here to speak, housing choices, the senior housing community, the parents of mentally disabled adults, the education community, and also the people that have come to the city council meetings. I was a little frustrated at our last meeting talking about when members talking about who we represent and what the opinions are out there in Palo Alto. I think it's important for us to remember 45% of the city rents, about 40% of the city is under 45 years old, and we do not represent that makeup in this room, but it is our job to represent that community. And so if we might not be talking to the people that have those differing views and are looking for more housing, but that is clearly a large portion of our city, and it's important that we're taking their views into consideration when we're making our choices. Thanks.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Well, just so happens we're all sitting together with, we all seem to agree. I agree with what Steve said about not wanting caps, that they're not a good idea. But I'm realistic that I don't know that the city council would be ready for such something so different from 50 cap and no cap. So that's why I will vote for option 3. And remember, option 3 is talking about 65 feet, and it's focused for certain uses that we need, particularly affordable housing. And if you're concerned about having enough space for parks and not negatively impacting our R1 neighborhoods, there's very little land in Palo Alto, and the little land that's left, you have to build up in order to get the affordable housing that we need. I'm not saying it should be for high-rent condos, but if we focus on the affordability for these places, I think it might pass muster. As for the caps on office space, on non-residential space, I don't know enough. I don't have enough economic information as to what that would mean. There isn't anybody here that's representing the business or the developer community that can tell us more stuff and what are the issues involved in that. So I don't feel educated enough to have an opinion of whether it should be 3.2 million, 1.7 million more square feet. I mean, that it's only 7% of what we have now. It isn't you don't even have that much of a cap, but should we have any cap? How will it affect our city's economy and the whole city infrastructure? Will anybody want to come here anymore if developers can't build anything? I mean, these are things we have to think about. And the other thing I want to say, though, is some people talk about the negative impacts of growth. Growth can have positive impacts. If more people can live here, you can reduce greenhouse gases because of less commuting. You can have a greater, more diverse, economically diverse community because you're providing more opportunities for more people to live here. So it isn't always negative. Growth can be positive, so I think we should change our mindset on that. I did submit other written comments that I hope will be taken into consideration, so I don't want to use up my 3 minutes on those. Thanks.
Wow, well done. Bob.
I'm not quite as smart on all this nuance, but I found myself agreeing with Steve on the notion of performance standards. I'm holding that broadly. I think that our council and the sort of the discourse of the day should be able to make the determinations rather than being bound to these numeric limits that are ultimately, in some respects, I feel antiquated. So I would, when we were looking at the options, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think that there was one last option which was performance-based. And then equally with the issue of the commercial/residential square footage numbers, it would be again towards that direction of performance-based and not holding to specific numeric standards that I think can be confusing. So those are my remarks. Thanks.
Thank you, Len.
Yes, thank you. As far as the building height limit, I think we should try to maintain the 50-foot limit. There are a number of opportunities and ways that appropriate developments can have exceptions and have special situations, but there is still a lot of opportunity for existing buildings and even new buildings to have smaller units and a number of different ways to increase the housing stock at the 50-foot limit. By the way, I am a member of the subcommittee, but because of the hours that they meet, I have been unable to attend. So I held off on the first go-round. But when I am able to attend a meeting, I'll step right into that, the first go-round. One of the other concerns I had that I'll talk about right now is the policy L51, where it talks about a mix of housing types. It says in appropriate locations, encourage a mix of housing types, including micro-unit studios, co-housing, et cetera. I think we really should define what we mean by inappropriate locations, because I don't believe that this is appropriate for residential R1, R2, and we might want to specify that it's more R15, 30, 40 mixed-use zones, so that we know exactly what we're talking about on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, and then Don.
Well, I'm very glad to talk and to support either option 3 or option 4. I find that high-rise buildings are very desirable for seniors and also for the young people. The mixture of the young and the old is fine in a high-rise. And so can some of the office things be incorporated in there, like is that 550 could be in that type of a high-rise building. So I'm in favor of it, and of course I've had experience in both kinds of high-rise buildings. And I want to tell you, though, about some of the problems that are faced by them if they are residential. They are, at least my Channing house, of course, was built 50 years ago. It does not have adequate garage space, and it has a big parking problem, and it's suffering through now adjusting to the RRP, working very hard on it, and working hard on how you can increase the spaces that are available and finding others, and also adjusting to the changes that there are in transportation. But I think in the next 10 years, it's going to be very exciting with all the ways that things are changing for delivery and for mobility that will be very adaptable. And so I think that they may not start to ride bicycles all around town, but they certainly will be able to use an app and order everything by mail order. Channing House, we order all our pills online, and they deliver them to us. And there's a solution, and we're working on this there. Actually, they're working very hard on this, and it's a serious problem because we also are dependent on a large number of underpaid employees that commute. The man that served me my breakfast this morning came from Oakland to give me my breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning there. Absolutely fine fellow, and working hard, and of course he'll quit as soon as he gets a job closer to home. But things are changing, so I want 3 or 4, go up.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you. So just a random walk through my thoughts. My first thought relative to 1, 2, and 3 goals here is that when I tried to plot what the policies were all about, it was not directly related to the goals, to the conversation in the preamble, where the preamble said we were going to talk about 4 different goals, one of which was housing affordability. And I would say that there are very few, if any, of the policies that are in 1, 2, and 3, or in any of the ones to come, that really deal with housing affordability. I continue to rag on the fact that the definitions need to be improved. Thanks to Jennifer, I now understand and will support some of the definitions that are there, but I'm not sure that this land use element did anything to clarify what is already definitions in the community services one. In terms of data, I agree with what Arthur said, that it's not just the percentages, it's the absolute numbers. But I would like us to try and adopt a consistent set of absolute and percentages. Some of these elements refer to the state finance numbers. Some of these elements refer to the ABAG numbers. ABAG numbers are typically regional. The state finance numbers are by city. Either way you look at it, whatever numbers you want to use, the growth in children in Palo Alto in the 15 years we're talking about is relatively minimal. Whether it's 0 or 15%, depending on what you look at, that's very small compared to the growth in seniors, which is something like 110 to 135% if you use those numbers. And I think that everything we look at, whether it's parks or buildings or whatever, needs to be addressed in the granularity of these cohorts rather than simply the general number. In terms of height, for me, the issue isn't height. For me, the issue is the quality of life as defined in the future. Many of the policies that we have now are to maintain the status quo. As Ellen just said, the status quo is not going to exist anymore. And so we have to talk about the quality of life in terms of walkability, in terms of transit, and many other different kind of things. And back to the EIR, I think it's silly to go ahead with the EIR at this point until we have the opportunity to weigh in on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian, and then Lisa.
Big skip. So to start on the height limit, I'm in support of removing the cap for a few reasons. One is it's from the 1970s, and 50 feet is pretty arbitrary. It was just kind of chosen out of thin air at the time. Even though there is a lot of buildable space across the city, it's not always in the best places. And removing the height limit not only allows density in transit and service-rich areas, but it also provides future real estate value, which can be taxed and diverted to services such as transit, retail preservation, parks, whatever you name it. One other thing, if you're going to talk about the environment and sustainability, tall buildings are way more efficient. There's a funny policy in the comp plan I actually wanted to comment on, but it's not a big thing, saying, promote infill development in Palo Alto. All we do in Palo Alto is infill development. There's actually nothing else. And so it's kind of funny to actually promote that and then not even consider building up or building more efficient structures. So for those reasons, I'm in favor of removing the cap. Finally, I actually like some tall buildings in the mix. I think it adds diversity to the city, and it's a nice thing. In terms of growth management, I'm also kind of on the pro-development spectrum here, where I'm in favor of option 5. I'm a strong believer that Palo Altans are not against growth itself, but rather the negative effects of that growth. I think performance zoning and management has proven to be really effective, particularly with office, research, and industrial uses, maybe a little less so with residential uses. And for me, it comes down to the fact that Palo Alto really is a world-class place because we have supported innovative and efficient and new businesses, which are increasingly unable to locate in Palo Alto due to costs. Recent office prices have reached a massive high. They're some of the most expensive in the world per square foot office rents, which leads to a monoculture of business types. I don't think that's healthy for the city economy. So I'm in favor of option 5 on growth management.
Thank you. Lisa, and then Mark.
Couple comments on the goals, but I'll start with the building height option. I can see pluses on all of them, but I think if I have to choose one, I would end up going with option 4, because I don't think there should be a specific limit. However, I would modify option 4 in 2 ways. So that's important to me to kind of vote for option 4. One is that the higher buildings would only be in the certain designated areas. So where we've agreed it's close to transit, fits the neighborhoods, kind of like the 101 Alma or Channing House, or I'm not saying they are or aren't, but pick where we would want them and put them there. And that's the only place I would go high. But in those cases, frankly, I don't care if it's 100 feet high. 50 or 65 is arbitrary to me. It depends on the location and the need. It would have to be a trade-off. The second thing I would do is I would have an overall restriction on tall buildings. I would hate us to see it become a San Francisco skyline of all high-rises, that's all you see, right? So there would be an overall limit. So with those two, I would go for option 4. And as part of that, I would definitely make it a trade-off. Somebody mentioned that the developers certainly can make more money by being allowed to go high. Well, that means that development must be for below market rent or seniors or something else that we're trying to incent. And I wouldn't do it otherwise. I wouldn't do it just for economics.
So that's where I would come out on kind of the options. On the growth management, I think I would probably still keep a cap. I don't feel strong, I think it should be a citywide cap. But I also I understand Adrian's about, I'm not sure for the future, but I kind of feel for now that that probably makes sense, because I personally think we need more office and residential and maybe retail, and not a lot of big office. And I think there's enough room for small office. But again, I'm somewhat neutral on it. For both goal L1 and L2, I would ask that we add the word diversity it's in my comments that is at your place, in the actual goal title, and diversity meaning economic diversity, but also land use diversity. It can be lots of diversity. I think it's a very important word missing from both of those goals. And then in goal L3, kind of tying back to the height, I would add that we add to goal L3 suggestions of where we would potentially permit a really high building for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark, and then Arthur.
For the height limit, actually I was hoping to see different numbers proposed, but anyway, the original 50-foot number, 50-foot limit that was proposed in the 70s, I don't think it was arbitrary. Basically, I think they were looking into 5-story buildings. Things changed. I mean, designs changed, and now with the higher ceilings for both retail and even residential. Residential used to be 8-foot limit for each floor, and now they're talking about 8 and 10-foot limits, or 10-foot height ceilings. So that would really, if we want to maintain the 5-story limit, we would go up to maybe 55 or maybe up to 60-foot height. Basically, that's what I would like to see. For going to a different, the proposed program L24 on the incentive to convert ground floor non-retail to residential along El Camino, I don't think that would be a good idea. It's when you have, especially along El Camino, when you have residential, you end up with developments like Arbor Real, where you have only the back of the building because of the noise and to prevent the noise from getting into the residences. So along El Camino, there should be only retail on the ground floor. There's the other new proposed program L25 on limiting the displacement of existing retail. I think the wording needs to be banning the displacement of existing retail to anything else, whether it was residential or offices. On policy L12, on requiring new or remodeled structures to be compatible with adjacent structures. Again, architectural design is evolving over the years, and to limit the innovation and new ideas is a disservice to the community. So what we will see, we see the difference right now between homes built in the 30s from homes built in the 50s and from homes built in the 70s. So to say that we want to keep them and maintain the same design as whatever is available, it's a disservice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Arthur.
So firstly, let me talk a little bit about height. I gave a discourse in my notes about the fact that there is no single 50-foot height limit in the city. That's an overall cap. And there are a lot of zones in the city. In fact, most zones in the city, the cap is actually lower than 50 feet. Other than grandfathering, the Stanford Medical Center was allowed to go above 50 feet. But essentially, there are only some places where you can have 50 feet. So I think we need to make sure the language indicates that only where it's, if we do increase it, and I'm not saying we should, but if you do increase it, we should make sure that we're referring to where the limits are now 50, and those change, not where the limits are lower. Secondly, the issue is that if you think that height increases affordability, there's these tall buildings right next to the Safeway called the Villages in Mountain View. And I'm looking right at their website. There's a studio apartments rent for between $3,000 and $4,400. One bedrooms rent for between $3,200 and $5,300. And two bedrooms rent for between $5,300 and about $9,000. So here's a situation where they went up. I wouldn't call those affordable, would you? No, I don't think so. So the issue is that it's not necessarily the case that going up leads to affordability. So we have to be very careful about, these sort of broad arguments that tie increases to affordability. There are certain situations like BMR housing. That's certainly affordable. But unless you do BMR, the new housing is going to be expensive. In terms of performance standards, when you have performance standards, that's sort of like PCs. PCs had kind of performance standards and goals, whatever. We didn't like PCs because those performance standards in PCs called public benefits didn't really work. You're really talking about public benefits in a new realm. Also, if your performance standards are measured post, the building's already there. Do you say if you don't meet the standard, you're going to tear down the building? Obviously, that's not going to happen. So you got to be careful about what performance standards means. In terms of Uber, Lyft, and self-driving cars, actually Uber and Lyft actually reduce transit use and increase traffic. That's what the data shows. So just quickly, I think that the 50-foot height limit is actually 4 stories. There are no 5-story buildings in Palo Alto that are 50 feet high. There are 5-story buildings in Palo Alto, they're 61 feet high. So if I'm in favor of the 50-foot height limit, but if you really want to go to 55 feet, 4 stories, not 5. Otherwise, you have shallower stories than we have now with 4 stories and 50 feet. So I don't think that accomplishes the goal. Thank you.
All right, first let me reiterate what Shani had spoken to me about, so these are her comments. She was supportive of option number 1, keeping the 50-foot height limit. She is no longer supportive of increasing the building height as proposed in option 2, so she would not vote for that. Option 3, she was intrigued by, but she would abstain from because she doesn't understand where and for what uses the buildings might be used, but she was intrigued to see if there is a way for that to work. And then she says specifically, I do not have enough information to consider option 3. And then she's opposed to option number 4. Some very general comments of my own then. I thought last night's conversation by the council, speaking of option 5, which I'm actually not going to address here, but I wanted to pull out some of the comments that I thought were very interesting to me. First of all, the council in previous sessions had agreed to focus their interests on growth around University Avenue and California Avenue. And in particular, it seems to me that Councilman Schmid has a vision of what those 2 places, University Avenue and California Avenue, are that is of greater density, potentially greater height, as he suggested. Councilman Burt, or Mayor Burt, I think it was Mayor Burt, and I may be wrong on this, had said he didn't feel that there should be a height limit, but there should be a story limit. And then Councilman Holman spoke about the inability to see actual examples to be able to action them in an appropriate way. So a couple of comments around all of those things. First of all, height is not a panacea for housing price. It cannot, but it's not a panacea. There have to be other regulations that allow us to get what we want out of it that don't have to do with the physicality of it, but it has to do with, who's allowed in, whether it's BMR, et cetera. However, a 50-foot solution doesn't get you better architecture or fewer impacts. It just doesn't, as we've recognized time and time again. I don't know what the limit should be. I actually think there should be a limit. I don't think it should be 100 feet or, that was thrown out as an example. And I do know one thing between now and 2030, and that is that we don't know what's going to happen between now and 2030. And so we need to allow enough flexibility for future councils and future committees such as this to be able to move within them. Which gets me back to Councilman Holman's comment, which is to be able to see what these things are. Unfortunately, the way the regulatory environment works, you can't do that at the policy level. You have to take action, and forgive me, I'm going to continue on here. You have to take action around numbers and around grand policies. You can't actually create pictures of what you're going to see. So I don't know what the exact number is, but I do believe that there is, we need to create flexibility and the opportunity for that number to be arrived at. And the way that you end up seeing that is by creating some policy that allows that flexibility to go, and then you study it specifically in specific plans, which are, as we've already talked about, potentially including University Avenue and California Avenue, and or other places, but we have yet to talk about those things specifically. I agree that we should try and find policies that do not have to be negotiated. That has gotten us into trouble many, many times. But again, I'm coming back to the fact that I don't know exactly what that number should be, what the height number is specific to that. I think Arthur's co-chair Keller's comments in his notes to us all about what zones actually can go up to 50 feet were extraordinarily helpful, because it's actually a very small amount of the city. I actually took out my colored pencils and was going to start coloring them in on the zoning sheets, which I brought with me, but then realized how difficult that is when you start adding in and trying to figure out which ones are next to lower heights that you would have to modify. It quickly becomes a very difficult thing to model, which was a conversation that Hitchens and I had way too late last night, in that it is very, very difficult to create pictures of what this stuff is. You have to create general policy and then focus in, and that's unfortunately just the reality of our regulatory environment. I'm not going to say much more about that. Let's move on. Unless there is anything urgent that somebody wants to say, let's vote on the 4, and then let's open up the discussion to see if there are more ways we want to. Yes. The other note that Arthur is asking me to comment on is his comment number 2, which notes that the housing element program H2.1.1 already states, quote, to allow for higher density residential development, consider amending the zoning code to permit high density residential and mixed use or single use projects in commercial areas with 1/2 mile of within 1/2 mile of fixed rail stations, and to allow limited exceptions to the 50-foot height limit for housing element sites within 1/4 mile of fixed rail stations. So his point there is that options 3 and 4 are already being allowed within the housing element. You can still vote for them, but there you are. Hamilton?
I'd just like you to clarify the definition of voting members.
Yeah, the only people here that can vote, or actually it's probably easier to exclude, there are 2 members that have been appointed to the committee that cannot vote, and that is well, right, okay, so this evening there's only 2, but we're also missing Heidi. So Heidi and Whitney and Adrian cannot vote, and the rest of us can, with the exception of staff. All right? So with a show of hands, and we'll have staff do the counting. All those that would vote to support option 1, keep the current building height of 50 feet, please raise your hand.
Is this people who support it or could
This is
live
people
with
that
it?
support this option, option number 1. You can vote for as many options as you want. All those that would vote to support option number 2, incorporate flexibility in building regulations to foster better design, and let me read the rest of it. Maintain a 50-foot height limit on buildings in Palo Alto, but allow heights up to a maximum of 55 feet for residential and retail mixed-use projects to allow flexibility in floor-to-ceiling heights and enhance the livability in multifamily residential units. All those that would support that policy, please raise your hand. Thank you. Option number 3, allow the possibility of building heights up to 65 feet in specific areas to encourage a more diverse and affordable range of housing options. The new policy, I'll go ahead and read it. Building height limits up to a maximum of 65 feet may be considered for areas well served by transit, services, and retail as a way to facilitate a mix of multifamily housing, including affordable units, units targeted to seniors and other special needs populations, and micro-units designed to accommodate younger members of the workforce. This includes a new program proposed here. Establish criteria and conditions that must be met in order to allow building heights up to 65 feet. Criteria could include affordability of the residential units, compatibility with surrounding land uses, sensitivity to context, proximity to transit services and retail, and mitigation or avoidance of adverse impacts on traffic and parking conditions. All those that would support that policy, please raise your hand. And then option number 4, allow the possibility of higher building heights in specific areas to encourage a more diverse and affordable range of housing options. The new policy would read, building height limits over 50 feet may be considered for areas well served by transit, services, and retail as a way to facilitate a mix of multifamily housing, including affordable units, units targeted to seniors, and other special needs populations, and micro-units designed to accommodate younger members of the workforce. The program underneath that reads, establish criteria and conditions that must be met in order to allow building heights higher than 50 feet. Criteria could include affordability of the residential units, compatibility with surrounding land uses, sensitivity to context, proximity to transit, services and retail, and mitigation or avoidance of adverse impacts on traffic and parking conditions. All those that would favor that option, please raise your hand. And just out of curiosity, is there anyone that did not vote for any? None, okay. So let's open it up to the whole, to the rest, to everybody here. And you can either speak to this or anything, for that matter. And I see one flag from Annette, Alex, Elaine.
Could I ask a question? I would really be interested in getting a sense from the group about whether they'd like the subcommittee to keep working on these height options, you know, other options, wordsmithing, or whether we're kind of done with these and we move on to the options about the other issues.
Perhaps they can answer that in their comments. So I had Annette, I had somebody over here. Who was it, Alex? Did you have your? Well, I'll take Lisa then. Sure. Let me just capture what we've got here now. Ellen.
You want to hear the numbers again?
Elaine, yes, hang on one second. Let me just capture everybody. And Steve. Okay, Hillary?
Yeah, we had 7 for option 1, 4 for option 2, 7 for option 3, and 10 for option 4.
All right. So, yes, Bob. Is your mic on? I'm sorry.
No, whatever. Or you said you can just talk about whatever you want to.
This is the open session, so you can either address what we've just spoken about or other topics in addition.
Okay, thank you.
Related to land use, ideally. Okay, and if you can, staff would also like to learn about how you might, what you would be interested in having the subcommittee, what their next steps on these particular options are. Annette, and then Lisa.
I don't mean to muddy the waters on this height thing, but, you know, there was such an interest last night and talking to some council members about the number of floors, that I don't know if that's something we should also consider. Throw that in the mix, and maybe we can talk more about that at the subcommittee meeting. I wanted to go back to a general concept, though. It's really interesting. I've been going to these seismic meetings and developers, and they are really, really focused on incentives. And right now, the incentives, financial incentives, are there for office, obviously. And so I think we really need to figure out what incentives we can give developers to build affordable units. I don't think we should be allowing anyone to build just nice little apartment complexes that are affordable, if you find affordable, up to $125,000 a year in salary. I think we should, if you look at, I think it's San Jose, that back to those just general units, they raised the BMR requirement up to 25% rather than 15%. So that's something that we might want to consider. But again, I think we should really focus, and maybe this is not in the comp plan, but really try to encourage some sort of land use, maybe at the Fry site, maybe on San Antonio, maybe on El Camino, of where we can actually build these large complexes, no matter what the height is, and have incentives that are focused in that area, and maybe have reverse incentives for people that just want to build office, or if they want to build residential without affordable units. Smaller units, I think, is another thing we really need to focus on in these large complexes. And so my whole feeling is, I'm not clever enough right now to suggest any incentives, but if that's really what we want to build, and that's really what the community is telling us, that needs to be a number one priority and message coming out of this group. And I don't think we should say, oh, let's sort of, figure out what the office cap is, which I think it should actually be lower, or let's figure out, what we're gonna do to these just regular market rate rental units. There's enough rental in Palo Alto. It's not affordable rental. I mean, Greg Shar said last night, there's 300, I think that was his number, of units available, maybe more. It's just that people don't want to pay the exorbitant rents. So just some random thoughts on that area.
Thank you. And I've missed the meetings that you went to with the developers. What meetings were those?
Well, the city is also doing this little task force on the seismically unsafe buildings, and there's a lot of commercial, but there's an amazing amount of multi-unit residential houses that are seismically unsafe. So there will be some discussion, which it's really a shame that the timing is not married to this. There will be some incentives at some point in policy for these unsafe buildings seismically to bring them up to snuff, which will be, we're going to give them more FAR, we're going to give them more height, we're going to give them more setbacks, more parking restrictions, TDRs. So it's all populated with developers, and it's absolutely fascinating listening to them.
Thank you. Okay. Lisa, and then Ellen.
Mine's more just, I think, Hillary, you'd said, should there be more work on the 4 options? I don't know whether it's revising the 4th if we agree, or there's a 5th one, is the 2 things that I still care about, which is that there be an overall height limit across the city, like how many tall things that we're not all just tall. And then the second is, where would we do them? And I'm not saying I know where, but that there be a specific designation of where. I don't know if we're okay adding that to number 4, or that would be a number 5, but beyond that, I don't know that there were a lot of modifications to 1, 2, 3, 4, were there, that we needed to do more revising. Okay, that was it, sorry. And then I just wanted to check, this was a separate comment, sorry. On the scenario 5, you mentioned, I think this is the one Steve sent the letter in as well to the city council. Did the city council they did ask to do both the little growth and then a lot growth kind of scenario? Thank you.
Thank you. Ellen, and then Elaine.
I want to bring to everybody's attention that tomorrow night at 6 o'clock at the Rickenana Library, VTA is having an outreach program to discuss the presence of the routes of VTA. VTA 35, which runs through from the Stanford Shopping Center all the way to the Mountain View one, is really the only link between all the shopping districts in the middle part of Palo Alto, and it is the link to, matter of fact, it's the only way you're going to use public transit to go to the city council meetings on a Monday night. Nothing else runs there. And it's the only way you could have gotten here tonight by public transit. So it's essential to have an alternative so people can come if they choose to speak the rest of it. And it goes through to all the libraries. Our own shuttle is supplementing this, and actually the shuttle does a lot of good on the shopping, and the rest of it is our connecting path, well, until we can get everything delivered by drone to our front door. So it's tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. I am convincing as many people who are members of Avenidas and live at Channing House to come and express themselves, and I hope you will support it.
Thank you. Steve and then Bob. I apologize. I skipped over you.
Thanks. So I wanted to just add on 2 points to the housing and non-residential growth management. I think with option 4, I want to follow up on something Co-Chair Garber said, which is there really needs to be some amount of certainty and some real strong definition placed on the criteria. I think a lot of people have mentioned that there's a lot of potential left, which may be true, but I think part of the problem that is we haven't really seen housing because there is kind of a lack of certainty that's prohibiting the construction of any type of housing in some of our commercial areas. So maybe we have potential, but we're certainly not creating the environment to construct that housing. And maybe we also need to consider the possibility we haven't set up the right incentives. And so on the height bit, I think it's important to really figure out what those incentives should be in order to get to those height limits and to get to those conditions. And I think there's some breaking news that Governor Brown is issuing these guidelines for as of right approvals for housing, which could be a game changer. And so, maybe that's something we should be considering for our community if we really, really want to be serious about housing, affordable housing, middle income housing, and a range of other things. I think also on the non-residential growth management bit, I really just want to reemphasize and underscore that we need to also couple this with the location of non-residential growth. Again, I think I mentioned last time that I think we really should be incentivizing development in the areas near transit. And I put up that map, and do we only want 50,000 square feet in downtown Cal Ave and El Camino, but allow 75, 150,000 next to the Baylands? And it came to my attention that a couple days later, that there's going to be a development proposal from Ming's for like a 65 or 70,000 square foot proposal right on the Baylands. But yet we only have 46,000 square feet remaining in the downtown area cap. I mean, it really seems to me that if we're going to talk about growth management, we should be locating that growth in the right place, the remaining 1.7 million or whatever square feet that's left, and prioritize where that goes, and not just allow it willy-nilly throughout the city, because that's going to create real problems.
Thank you. Steve, and then Bob.
Turn it on again. Playing to my weakness. I have one policy point and one process point. Building on what Elaine said, when I advocate for flexibility, that's about the number. That's not about the location or the type or the criteria. So when I supported 4, flexibility on the number, I suspected that we would develop specific locations like downtown or Cal Avenue with specific criteria for specific groups of people that might get priority for the height and have pretty specific performance-based criteria. So it wasn't just anything goes. On the process, pretty much we've stuck to policy. But every once in a while, here and at council, somebody throws out a number. There are going to be more kids. There are going to be less kids. All of the housing in tall buildings isn't affordable. You can't mitigate trips. I'd like some rules, some help from staff, some consultants coming in. I work on this stuff every day for a living, and I have stayed out of those factual questions because I'm here as a citizen. But I'm getting to the point where I feel like there are a lot of things being said here that are questions of evidence, and they're just personal perspectives. So I'd like the staff and the consultants to come in with some evidence on those questions. So we're just not slinging stuff that we think is true and everybody doesn't know whether it's true or not.
Thank you, Bob, and then Hamilton.
So I put in the packet an idea I had that kind of has been evolving, listening to, that a little bit was inspired last night, listening to council talk about the drastic needs for new housing, and hearing that we need, thousands of new housing units and that we need them at a market rate that our staff or the people that work for Ellen or school teachers, the firefighters that I know. And so I don't know, you could call this a moonshot or a bogey shot, but the concept that I was coming up with was the evolution of the airport. And so you saw in your packet a sketch where I looked over the concept of a 15-year horizon of winding down the airport and essentially moving, which is about, 110 acres, and moving the golf course, if you will, to the area of the airport so that you ostensibly could open up an area of city-owned land that would be notionally 110 acres that the city could facilitate the development of almost a north of Bayshore project that could address and build thousands of housing units. So the notion of there's obviously some problems with the concept. It's not in the right area, but broadly there's, I think that those people that are looking for housing would think that a north of Bayshore approach would be useful. Hamilton is only a victim of my discussion, but we chatted it out a little bit and we realized that if, the airport site itself is a poor place for housing, but if you were to use that for the golf course or the parkland, you actually improve the habitat issue rather than having an airport there. So if you will, the ask is at some point would be that we could begin at least vetting the notion of a alternate use of the airport, and to see if that the notion of using the airport as a, serving it's not part of the transportation, but the notion, is it better to provide for housing, which is a crisis issue, or to provide the utility, the limited utility I see the airport providing. So that was a discussion in your packet, and just something to show that we can think out of I was just trying to think out of our little box a little bit. So thanks for indulging me on that.
Thank you, Bob. Elaine, did you want to speak again, or were you? No, that's okay. Hamilton, then Bonnie.
I wanted to build on something that Steve said, which is when we talk about going over the height limit, attaching specific criteria to it, right now the text says could include, and it could include things that help affordability, but it might not. It doesn't say it will include higher BMR percentages, smaller units, more affordable housing. I watch all these people go to city council, they sign petitions, they sign up for Go Big, believing that if they get on board, that they're going to, and these policies come through, they're going to get affordable housing. But if all that's built is luxury condos, they're not. And I think it would be a real disservice of this committee to walk out of here all excited about having raised the height limit, but not doing anything to provide housing that was below market rate. And I think on the flip side, if you do put in strong language about that, you really will have come through. The council is going to decide the height limit, but we can, but I think if you frame this as really putting in some language behind it, not only, even though I'm not in favor, not only will it be easier for them to vote for it, but you will also be backing up, you'll be following through on your promise to all these people who are signing petitions and who really are very negatively impacted by the housing prices. So I'd love to be back in the subcommittee with Steve crafting this language so that if one of the higher options does go through, we're really going to see some benefit to those people who are helping this community, who really want to be here, but just who are currently priced out. Thank you.
Thank you, Hamilton. Bonnie, and then Arthur.
I'll have to thank Annette and Hamilton for emphasizing the importance of focusing some of these possibilities for affordable housing. If you're going to have additional height, make it just for, real affordable housing. You might even have a little bit of mixed income, so you have that middle range that doesn't get, under current regulatory policies, there isn't any subsidy for middle range. There's only for very low income. Anyway, and I was also, in response to Bob, I was envisioning a poor jackrabbit getting hit by a golf ball, but that's what you have out there in the Baylands. I just want to say something about some of the words that are in this document. There's city needs, compatibility, quality of life, design review. These are loaded terms that are subject to so many different interpretations that I think they should not be used in the comp plan. We should try and use words that recognize that there are differences in lifestyles. Like a quality of life for people who live in single-family, quiet areas is going to, the desires for that lifestyle is different for young people who live downtown where lots of stuff is happening and that's what they want to do. So we ought to think about that. Compatibility with neighborhoods is another one of those words. We have some parts of town that have like a lot of Eichlers, and the houses all look kind of alike. Then we have College Terrace or Downtown North or Barron Park, where the styles are so eclectic, and that's what people like. So we have to watch out for these words, and as the consultants go through, is there a word here that is too vague unless we define it or make qualifications or recognize the variability of neighborhoods? Because there's nothing in the design section that talks about the different styles of neighborhoods that are in the city. And there's a lot of different styles, and we should celebrate those. And also I want to follow up on what was said about the non-residential caps. I don't think there should be any caps in areas that are now designated as PTOD, the pedestrian transit oriented zones. Because what's the point? That's where you want the density. So if you have a cap in that area, you're going to defeat another policy somewhere that talks about higher density in that area. So it should be more location focused, and I appreciate, I think, Dan, you were saying, where the places are, where there are height limits. The same would apply to office cap limits or non-residential cap limits. We have to be more fine-tuned. Thank you.
Thanks. Arthur, and then Mark.
So firstly, one way to accomplish what Lisa talked about is the idea of air rights. So basically, if some property is underdeveloped, and you wish to sell your rights to some property that wishes to develop even more, that's a concept that basically doesn't mean everything is at an astronomical height. The second thing is that in terms of growth management, I basically support a reworded option 3. And part of the issue is that I'm still in favor of annual growth limits. The growth limits will adjust based on how we are in terms of addressing impacts. We have a beauty contest, and part of the criteria for the so-called beauty contest is where the development is placed. So that's how you handle it. Basically, if the development is placed near transit, it gets more points than if the development is placed away from transit and is inducing of cars. The next thing is I entirely agree with Ellen with respect to the VTA. One of the things that Ellen did not bring out is not only do we risk the potential loss of the 88 bus and the 35 bus, but we also risk the potential loss of outreach services because outreach is provided only within 3/4 of a mile of a fixed route transit. So if the 35 bus goes away, then we suddenly lose the outreach service, which is even more expensive than providing a bus service within Palo Alto. That would be a real travesty. So I think we need to concern ourselves with that. The other thing, somebody brought up the issue of increasing the BRR requirement. There's essentially two kinds of BMR. There's inclusionary zoning, which tends to be more middle of the AGI, and then there's the very low and low. And those tend to be created through special projects that are usually affordable housing projects. And it might be, in order to create more middle income things, we might want to increase the BMR percentage. That's being considered in San Francisco. It was mentioned it's being considered in San Jose. So we should explore that. And actually, I think that we should think about how we tighten the availability for the housing density bonus law so that we tighten it to really focus on what we don't already require, but where people go over and above where we are now in terms of requirements. I know there are issues in terms of how we handle state law, but I think that there are things we could do to manage that in such a way that we're incentivizing exceeding our current rules.
Thank you. Mark, then Don.
Yeah, I want to talk about the housing affordability and the calls for build, baby, build, like what the article of the New York Times was titled. Actually, building more housing is not going to address the housing prices in Palo Alto. Housing prices in Palo Alto has always been higher than surrounding communities. And so for workers in the city, or whether they were city workers or people providing services to residents, then BMR is the only solution. And that's what I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Don and then Doria.
So I just want to actually do something I don't usually do and reinforce or repeat what some other people might have said. Steve's not here, but his comment was similar to my earlier comment, that it would be really nice if we had some numbers that we were all using and agreeing on so we didn't have stated opinions. I think that would be really useful. I've never written a business plan that I didn't say assumptions to start off with so people knew what that was. Second thing, I agree with all the statements. I think Arthur was the first one to really point it out that building higher, going beyond 50 feet or 75 feet or whatever, probably doesn't solve the affordability problem, but to agree with Hamilton, unless you're really deliberate about what kind of statements you make in there. On that point of housing, I agree with Annette. I think it's important that we don't assume that building taller buildings solves the housing problem. I think the housing problem needs to be attacked in innovative ways, not just within the context of 50 feet or 75 feet or whatever. It's a bigger problem than just height. I really agree with what Ellen was saying, that the height limit is not necessarily an issue of height or whatever, or even affordability. It's more a question of quality of life, and whoever changed the wording from quality of life, I think Bonnie, to lifestyle. I think this granularity of the population density that we're going to have, or the population diversity that we're going to have, there are going to be different lifestyles, and we need to imagine what it might be, which reinforces my whole concept of whether it's parks or something else. We're putting so much effort into this. I think that granularity of analysis as opposed to grossness of analysis is really important. And I really only have one other question. We keep saying we can't model this. We can't show the council member her pictures that she wants. I introduced you to a company from Pennsylvania that uses ESRI software for planning purposes. They could build you as many models as you want. They could give you models that said, let's take this building, let's take this building, let's take this building, and give you graphic models of every building being 75 feet, every building being 3 feet. I don't know why we're not engaging with that kind of technology.
Thanks. Doria, and then Amy.
So I just would like to agree with many of the speakers who are talking about the housing we need is affordable housing, and building taller buildings does not necessarily in any way create affordable housing, and no one has brought forth any evidence to show us that. So I just want to reiterate that. And when we talk about redeveloping, we are displacing people and businesses. So small businesses are going to be displaced by redevelopment, and existing families who already are part of this community will be replaced by redevelopment, because the places, unless they are below market rate or subsidized in some way, the new buildings will be more expensive. So I think people talk about diversity. I actually think there's quite a bit of diversity in Palo Alto already. There are a lot of people who are just barely, in my neighborhood, elderly people and other people just barely able to stay here, and they are the diversity we're going to lose, and they're already a part of this community. So I think it's very important to remember that. In terms of performance measures, you can't performance measure away every impact there is. I think performance measures are important to have, but we have to use them along with sensible zoning to maintain a Palo Alto that we can recognize and that we all want to live in. As with regards to housing, it's not that there's a lack of rental housing or housing in Palo Alto. It's that it costs more than people want to pay. And that is not a problem that we can fix in the comp plan, nor is it a problem that the city council can fix. So I think we should stop saying that. With regards to getting more consultants in here to give us more facts, I think it's important to remember that consultants are often also biased, and you can skew facts in any direction you want to, and statistics also. I believe most of the people in Palo Alto do not want a city with taller buildings in most places, and with increasing traffic and congestion problems and increasing numbers of children in our schools, so that the quality of the schools go down, and there won't be enough services for all the people here, etc. So I think we should think of really strongly about what redevelopment does to the existing community that already lives here, and that's people with small businesses and people who live in some of our least expensive housing, and the elderly.
Amy, and then Len.
I'd like to start with the higher density buildings. I think that we in the course of discussion, we are chasing away that we are looking for higher density, but we in turn focus on the building heights. And I just wanted to say that to start with, that I spoke to a couple people who expressed the idea and the desire to downsize, but where do they move to? They desire to have like a 2-bedroom apartment close to downtown. And so if there is such a building that they can move to, then they can vacate their current home. And that, I think, is a starting point. So we need to create a venue for the movement. And I think the high density will help us to elevate the need of people wishing to downsize and also the younger people who wish to stay here, because that is the starting point. And the next thing is that before I came, I spoke to one of the school board members and asked about the projection of the school enrollments. The projection is that for the next 3 to 6 years, we are looking at the decrease in the school enrollments. There are 21 empty classrooms across the district in elementary schools. And I asked, what kind of data do they base it to come up with that kind of projections? Basically, the children from baby boomers, that they pretty much just on their way out of the middle school and high school. This will be the last year that we see the 8th grade in Jordan moving into high school. And from there, they're projecting a decrease in enrollments. So the older, the children from the baby boomers are moving out of the school. The younger generation, they are postponing the forming of the family, and that there is no younger children to coming into the school. So that created this long gap. And can I just finish that, because I am part of this land use subcommittee, I wanted to circle back to what Winnie was saying about this non-residential growth management. This is 3.2 million square feet and 1.5, and we don't have people that represent the business community. Maybe the Chamber of Commerce should come and give their perspective. This is something I am looking at, like what it is that we need to decide on, and then we are fighting. Oh, we need to keep it. We need to expand. We increase, decrease, and based on what? I just think we need to have, people that really know what they're talking about to come and give us a perspective.
Thank you, Amy. Hillary, you wanted to comment?
I'm sorry, can I just jump in on that issue of the non-residential cap? And I apologize, I'm really suffering from lack of sleep, so I maybe am not going to be coherent, but I'm hoping that at the next subcommittee meeting I can attend and we can have some discussions about a series of questions about this non-residential cap. I mean, they would be questions like, what happens if the cap is reached? From a planner perspective, the cap that we have in the plan about the downtown cap is really good, because it says, well, what happens if you start to get close to the cap? It lays out some steps. But the citywide cap, there's no such, like what happens if we get there? And in most planning circles, what really happens when you get to the cap, you raise the cap. I mean, so if that's the case, really what are the objectives? What are we trying to do? I've always thought that one of the objectives of the cap was monitoring. So we're monitoring, we're watching the cap, how much gets built. And if that's the objective, my question is, does it make sense to be monitoring all non-residential uses? So if you convert from retail, 100 square feet of retail to 100 square feet of office, it's 0 under a non-residential cap. But if we had a cap that was really monitoring what we care about, which I think is office R&D in this day and age, does it make sense to focus on that use? So that's another question that I'm hoping the group will consider. And then also just this question that some of you have raised about whether it's more important to monitor and limit the pace of growth and the location of growth rather than the total amount, particularly if we think that setting a cumulative cap may not be that effective in the long term. And then one last question, which is some of this language refers to net zero, and I would just ask everybody to consider, and we'll talk at the subcommittee about what that really means. Are people, when they use that term, do they really mean 0, or do they mean something else? And if we mean something else, it'd be nice to say what it is our objective is, and maybe we can work on that collectively. To those of you who have requested some demographic data about what we think the future holds, we can try and bring that back to you. And then for those of you who have commented on the EIR and the sequencing of all this, I hope you'll give me a chance to talk to you further about, kind of why we are where we are and why these things are working in parallel. I think there are some good reasons, there are some challenges, as you've indicated, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain that a little further in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Len, Adrian, and then me. And I think we'll have completed a round, and we're going to be at our time limit.
Thank you. Real quick, I don't want to make this a Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders kind of a thing, but I want to respectfully remind staff to ask the people who were not here how they vote and then report the final totals out to all of us. And I thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Equally interesting would be to include the votes of the non-voting members because of the way that they're participating. They're aggressive. They're not allowed to, but this is a straw vote, not a formal vote.
Okay, thank you. Adrian.
Just two quick things. So one, we've been talking a lot about data that's helpful towards this affordability and density issue. There's a really great report by the Legislative Analyst's Office, the state's nonpartisan fiscal advisory. It goes deeply into California's housing crisis and why the costs are so high, and it really simply is an issue. We're not building enough housing. You can look into it. There's some really interesting graphs. One of the fun ones is, I think it's about a 2% replacement rate, starts to bring down housing costs. That's really not that much. The other issue I just wanted to get at quickly is there's been a few mentions of losing diversity. I think that is something important for Palo Alto to focus on, but we're probably more at risk, in my opinion, this isn't backed by data, but of losing retail and cultural diversity by not doing anything.
Thank you. I've got a variety of comments. I'm hoping they will. I'm sorry, Annette.
Can I just make one fast comment?
Go.
You know, we always have our opinion, and I just wanted to just chime in as respectfully as I can. I just can't accept the fact that we would develop any more on Bayshore or lose our precious airport. That to be in the record.
All right, well, I'll actually start there. What I told Bob before he left was that although I appreciate him trying to solve in large bites our housing problem, I was reminding him of Montgomery Ward in Chicago, who 150 years ago said the lakefront belongs to the public, and I would have a very hard time supporting such a thing. So I agree with you on that. At any rate, I have a variety of comments. I'm not sure they'll fit into 3 minutes, but I'll do my best here. Like some of the other professionals here, I try not to, frankly, lead with some of my lead as a professional and try and comment and participate more as a civilian. There is one topic that or one note that I wanted to bring up because it actually came up in the council meeting last night, which is actually a mechanical problem that keeps us from achieving some of the densities that we have been talking about and that staff is aware of, and that is that there is a conflict really inside the zoning that deals with units versus density. And I don't know if that is something that we should deal with at the comprehensive plan level or if it should occur as in the zoning level, but I would look to staff to perhaps advise the subcommittee if there should be some inclusion on that at the policy level. Another miscellaneous note that came up, I believe, 2 meetings ago because I missed the last one, so I don't know if it was talked any further. But there was some hint or suggestion or at least an open door to talking about Stanford being finding room in Stanford's portfolio to provide workforce housing. And the conversation was around what was happening around the end of the Stanford Park, Research Park towards Palo Alto Square and that property along El Camino. If there's an opportunity to do that, that would potentially take a lot of static out of the community's conversation in very large numbers, as well as take advantage of Stanford's inherent strengths that the city struggles with, which are transportation and distribution of of people within that portfolio. So I think there's an opportunity there. It has been discussed that increasing the amount of housing will or may not impact housing price. And if you'll forgive me, I'm just going to continue on here for a moment. The topic that I wanted to bring up there is that I thought what was extremely useful, although interestingly not talked about last night in option number 5, what was staff was also going to be commissioning the consultant to do was to look at the impacts of growth, subtracting all of Palo Alto out of that so that we get a clear idea of what happens regionally and the regional impacts on Palo Alto. I'm very interested in all the other stuff, but I think as base information, there is nothing more important to doing that because that'll level a lot of the conversation about the impacts that Palo Alto has. Because although people may speak about increasing housing not having impacts on the marketplace, us trying to mitigate traffic and the rest of that, I would argue, short of having other data that tells us otherwise, regardless of what we do, we have neighbors that are going to impact us, and what we do will have de minimis likely impacts on that. But that will reveal and find out if my hypothesis is in fact correct. So I think that's an extraordinarily important piece. Let me touch on something else that Dory mentioned. And I would hope, Doria, that you would be able to find some confidence in the numbers that that staff may be able to develop to try and create a baseline set of numbers, be they about housing or affordability or whatever they are. Because I do think that it helps us find ways, numbers that we can all agree on. Part of my interest in creating the memo that you all received when I was not here about the history of the building height was because there's a lot of provenance put on the history of numbers, the history of different topics. And my real goal in creating that memo was not to take a position one way or the other on the height, but just simply to give us all a base understanding of what that history was, so that we didn't have to argue about that as much. But we do have to trust that the number is somewhere along the line, that we all have to have a baseline to understand. We may argue with them one way or the other, but at least let's not discount all of that. Comment on quality of life. I appreciate all these comments, and I rarely talk about sort of personal topics with me when I talk about these topics, but let me break my rule for a brief moment. I never expected to live in Palo Alto. I thought I'd be in Chicago the rest of my life. I liked the city. Coming to Palo Alto was a surprise, and I have enjoyed it greatly. Although my Chicago friends may not appreciate it, I actually think my quality of life is higher here than it was in Chicago. However, I don't feel that the city owes me for my streets to be without traffic. I don't think that the city owes me to be able to get from one side of Palo Alto to another at rush hour, at 10 minutes less than I can today. It's irritating, a number of these topics, or a number of these issues that we're talking about, but the reality is that I would never have been able to come to Palo Alto if not the company I worked for brought me here. And I don't want to talk about it as a privilege, but I don't want what I see all the time in communities up and down the peninsula that I work in, which is where the zoning acts as a discriminatory regulation and keeps people out of communities. And I see that actually being used by some communities to keep people out. I think it's really important for us to find ways to open up the community. And if it means I have to wait longer to be seated at a restaurant, if it means that I have to wait 3 cycles when everybody's commuting to drop off their kids at Palo Alto High School, I'm willing to live with that. Quality of life for me. Finally, what the subcommittee needs to, I think, focus on regarding height, and this is specific to height, and that is not the number. It's what that number does to serve us. I don't think 50 feet has served us well. We still have all the problems of traffic. We have all the problems of bad architecture. I don't think that changes when it becomes 55 or 65. So I think the discussion isn't about the number. It's if that number, any number, really gets us what we want. I'd like to see different ways of trying to get there than just through that number. All right, that's all I got. So moved. Is there, well, actually, before we move, let me just ask staff if there anything else that we need to cover before we leave. Thank you. It is 8:33 on my clock.